Kalkaska, Michigan in March. Now, I'm from Muskegon, Michigan, so it's not too far away from here. But when we were in Kalkaska, they had 5 feet of snow on the ground still in March. And the name of the church up there is Evergreen Baptist Church. We decided to change the name to Ever White Baptist Church because it was so snowy. They canceled the service and got it in. But praise the Lord, we got to meet Sam, and he's connected us to you guys. And that's a missionary, you know, just connecting with churches and people. Let me share with you a little bit about South Sudan. It's the world's newest country. It's the world's newest mission field. The people need the gospel in South Sudan just like they do in Michigan, in your town here. And you'll see a little bit in our video as they bring that up. You'll get to see South Sudan was in war. In 2011, they became the world's newest country, but it came at a price. They had fought for over 200 years with the Muslims in the north, and they had constantly been a constant battle fighting with the Muslims and gaining ground and losing ground. And there was a man named Dr. John Gehring who united the tribes. And when he united the tribes, they formed what was called the Sudan's People Liberation Army, and they finally liberated themselves from the Muslim north. And when they broke off from northern Sudan, they didn't want it. Their main language was Arabic, but they wanted nothing to do with anything Arab at all. And so they made English their main language. Now, no one spoke English at the time, but it was their main language. And so it was a blessing to us because my wife graduated with an English teaching degree. And so that automatically opened the door for her to be able to teach English to the children, as well as many other opportunities that are there. It also gave us a great opportunity to be able to witness to people in English. The boys over there are the ones who go to school. The girls, they generally don't go to school for very long because they have a lot of responsibility. It's kind of opposite what we would think here in America. But the girls go to, or the boys go to school, and so most of the boys now, they speak English very fluently, and they're very accustomed to talking in English, and so it's easier for me to be able to witness to them. And so when I was young, I would watch presentation videos and things like that of missionaries, and I thought, that's nice to see. But when I became a missionary and I started seeing other missionary presentations, I began thinking, that's a place that I can't go to. That's a people that I can't go to reach. And so missionary presentations began to mean more to me, watching different missionary presentations. So I want you to understand as you watch this, and there may be glitches or things like that, but we're showing you part of our heart. We're showing you the country that we'd like to go to. And so I'll come up and answer questions after this, but we'll go ahead and play the video. Amen.
Sorry.
All right, you talk that's perfectly fine.
Okay.
The devil's always in the electronics of the church. He's always in the sound system and things like that. That's just his way of showing up to discourage people. Let me say this. I'll mention this. Please stop by our table and pick up a prayer card. And I know your pastor used to be a missionary. We talked about that. And your pastor's very kind. And your pastor understands, the biggest thing. I'm sure he'd tell you the same exact thing. The Bible says that the prayers, the effectual, fervent prayers of a righteous man availeth much. I don't know what much is. The Bible doesn't say how much. But I do know that every prayer that you pray, every prayer that's said on our behalf, makes a difference. And I want everyone to pray for us. Please pick up our prayer card and put it somewhere where you'll see it often. If that was me, I'd put it right there on the refrigerator, where some place that I visit quite often. And then just every time you see it, say a prayer for us, please, and let it be on the forefront of your mind. Because honestly, in a place like this, in South Sudan, I felt a lot of spiritual warfare. There's, of course, a physical battle going on right now between a civil war, and there's poverty and things like that. But honestly, it felt like as I was there, I felt the devil fighting God's work. And the devil does. He fights God's word. And in America, we're so blessed to have things like the Bible and other Christians and a good church like this and a beautiful building to come to. We have those kind of advantages. The devil hasn't had as much open reign as he has. And although that America seems to be getting worse and worse, and the Bible tells us that it will be that way, Africa has never been Christianized. They've never had the opportunity to have the Bible printed in their language or beautiful buildings to come to and a nice congregation to encourage each other. You fight the devil a lot. And I can't fight the devil. I have to let God take care of that. And the more prayers that are set up on our behalf are going to make a big difference to us. So please continue to pray. And if the video doesn't work, I can tell you what's in it. We've seen it a bunch. South Sudan, when they broke off of North Sudan, as I said before, they were their own country, but they were young. And there was little fighting amongst the tribes. And so there was a lot of displaced people. Right now there's roughly, they say by the end of 2019, there will be 3 million people displaced. That's a little over 40% of the population. That's a lot of people. On my first trip to Africa, we drove maybe 100 miles down an awful little two-track, and definitely worse than anything I had ever seen before. We drove down a two-track and we saw little villages and little huts of maybe 15 or maybe just 10. They call them tukels, we call them huts. Maybe just 10 little huts in a little area. And I remember thinking, how can one man or even 10 or even 1,000 people get the gospel to all them little areas? It seemed impossible. But through this war, God has brought people from all them little areas to refugee camps. And so right now there is nearly 1 million people in northern Uganda that are in those. There's 3 big refugee camps. And 3 million people, over 40% of the population, are in those refugee camps. And so it's a big opportunity for us to reach them while they're in consolidated areas. The missionary that we'll be working with has a church in each of the 3 refugee camps in northern Uganda. And he's seen hundreds of people saved. Now imagine with me, if you reach the people while they're in those areas, you see them saved. When they go back up into their country, they'll take it with them. You teach them in the Bible and you show them Bible principles and Bible truths, and they'll take that with them. One man that we witnessed to in the country there, he was a drunk, and he beat his wife awful, and he beat his kids and things like that. He came to us, and he was our carpenter, and we led him to the Lord. And then he came to us on Sunday and said, okay, I'm ready, come, we're ready. And we said, ready? What are you ready for? He had gathered his village so that we could preach to them. And so we went to his village and we preached the gospel to them, and many of them got saved also. And they saw such a difference in him. He gave up alcohol right away. As soon as he went from a drunk to he just gave it up completely. And he didn't beat his family, and they saw such a difference in his life that when he told them about the missionaries who brought him Jesus, everyone wanted to hear. He gathered everyone on Sunday, and then he came to have us preach to them. And that's how the Africans are. They're hungry for the gospel. But right now the country is split and torn because it's a young country. They have a lot of obstacles to get over before they can be an official, peace and peace can reign in the country. So pray for that also. But mostly pray that the gospel can be spread to the country. One of the verses I like to quote is, if the gospel be hid, it is hid to them that are lost. And that's what was going through my mind as I was driving to these villages after village after village, small little villages. I remember thinking, if the gospel be hid, it's hid to those that are lost. How can we get the gospel to those that the devil is trying to blind? The devil tries to hinder God's work because he knows that people will get saved. He knows that he loses ground, so of course he tries to physically fight you. One of the ways he fights you is if it rains over there, people don't work. They don't work. They don't come to church if it rains. They just stay home because the roads are so muddy. Well, they have a rainy season that's 3 months long. And so when it rains during the rainy season, you'll have nobody come to church, no one go to work, nothing gets done, no fields get planted or anything like that. And so that's the way that the devil, it always seems to rain on Sunday when people should come to church. That's how the devil works, to keep people out of church. And so pray with us about that. And there's just so many open opportunities. There's so many doors of our ability to witness. Please Please pray for everything. And I guess we've given up on the video, have we? That's just fine. If it doesn't play, we want to try maybe one more time. The Bible says, my eye affecteth my heart. That's why it's important for you. I want to show you guys pictures. If we don't get to see them on the video, you can definitely swing back by our board there, and there's pictures on our board that you can see. There's nothing in the country that's westernized at all. When I went to Uganda, they have a westernized city that has malls and cars. In South Sudan, there's no pavement anywhere. There's not a road system. There's not infrastructures. There's nothing like that. Africa, South Sudan is at one point they were number 2 on the list of just being the most un-westernized countries. They have nothing. It's hard to get a car. Most people ride around on, they call them bodas, but they're dirt bikes that you can ride through the little trails. But they're very open to the gospel, though. And the Catholics over there tell the people that in order to be saved, you have to pay a day's wage to be baptized. And after you're baptized, you pay a day's wage, and they give you a certificate. And you can't go to heaven without your certificate. So if it gets wet and it gets ruined or it burns or something like that, you have to come in and you pay another day's wage, a whole day's wage to them to get another certificate, because you can't go to heaven without it. And so that's just one way that the devil tries to deceive people, to get them to disbelieve, in salvation. And so that's a big hindrance to us. Pray for that with us, that God will open the eyes. When you tell somebody the truth, when you tell them that salvation doesn't have to be bought, because it's already been paid for. Salvation isn't something that I have to work for, because God did the work. Jesus Christ came down and He did the work. I don't have to do the work. I don't have to buy it because He paid for it. All I have to do is ask Him to come into my heart. It's a free gift. And you're saved. When they finally get that, they're so excited. It's like you can see the light come on in their eyes, and they're excited to be a Christian. They're excited to be saved. And even though they don't have anything, when you take up an offering, because it's important to teach them to give of their time and give of their resources, you'll see them give, and maybe they'll give a handful of rice, or maybe they'll give some maize or some corn or something like that. It's exciting because they're learning the principles that are found in the Bible. When you learn the principles of giving and giving of your time and sacrificing for God, and it's exciting. And it's exciting for them because they want to. And so, and it's exciting for us, and just to see the young Christians get on fire for God. They have a Bible training camp where we'll be working, where they teach young men. Right now there are 12 in the school, 12 young men that are learning to be pastors. And so a big problem over there are that polygamy is just very big. A lot of people have even 5 or 6 different wives, and so you have to teach them, to have one wife, and teach them this and that. There are a lot of tribal and custom things that are a little bit different. Obviously, the culture is different. We're not going to try to make them into Americans. That's not the goal. We want to make them into Christians. God sorts all that kind of stuff out, but the American way is not their way, and I don't want to push my own American ways on them. I just want to get them Christ, and Christ will change them. There's a lot of humanitarian groups who go over there, and they drill wells for them, and they give them food and all this stuff. And sometimes we missionaries get looked down on because even though we are involved in, we do food programs and things like that, we're not as involved in those groups. Well, the truth is, they're just putting, for one example, they build new houses for the people. Well, they're putting an old man with an old nature in a new house. And what we do is we try to win the man to the Lord, and we put a new man in the old house. If you put an old man in a new house, it'll be the same. Nothing's changed. You just put him in something that looks a little better. But he still has a soul that will spend eternity in a place called heaven or a place called hell. You need to teach him the truth. And so that's our goal. Please pray with us about that. Is it going to work or it will? All right, let's go ahead and try it. Amen.
gained its independence from northern Muslim Sudan. After over 20 years of guerrilla warfare, they had paid a high price for their freedom. Over 1.5 million people had been killed. South Sudan welcomed missionaries and aid workers with open arms. They were excited for the chance to start rebuilding their homes and settling into their new nation. Peace was short-lived, however. Vice President Riek Machar led the military in a coup against President Salva Kiir. Their power struggle thrust the new country into its own civil war. Now, since 2013, 400,000 people have been killed and over 2.3 million people have been forced to flee their homes. Will the people of South Sudan ever know peace?
Baxter, and God has called my wife Abby and I to be missionaries to South Sudan, Africa. When I was a teenager, we had missionaries to Tanzania, Africa, stay in our home, and that's when I knew God was calling me to be a missionary to Africa, but I wasn't sure where. In 2012, I was able to take my first trip to South Sudan, Africa. Through this trip, and my second, in 2014, God confirmed in my heart that I would be a missionary to this place. I was amazed on both trips at how open the people were to the gospel. The country is now at war with themselves. Almost 3 million refugees have fled the country. In the beginning, we'll be working with Missionary Eric Porterfield and the 3 churches he has started in the refugee camps. I believe God has called us to be missionaries for such a time as this, to be able to reach these people while they are in one concentrated area. Please pray for my wife and I as we take the gospel to the South Sudanese.
You just saw our heart. You saw pictures of the place that we'll be going to, and that's special to us. I'm glad you guys got to see that. One thing I didn't say before is, in the country of Uganda, where the refugee camps are, they said that within 5 years they'll start pushing the refugees back up into their country. And so this opportunity won't last forever, unfortunately. It's something that will be short-lived. But I pray, and I trust that you'll pray with us, that God will give us the ability to reach as many people with the gospel as we can while they're there. And so please pray with us about that. I also forgot to mention on our table, there's a place where you can sign up for our monthly prayer letter to kind of keep track of how we're doing in our support raising and everything else. And so you can sign up for that just to kind of stay connected with us, and you can have your email address and keep you posted on different things like that. My wife is here now, and our baby also. She looks just like my wife, and we're very thankful for that. And Arminda Joy, it's a very, very old name. It's a family name, a great-grandparent. And so please pray for her and pray for my wife and I as we're traveling with the She's 1 month old. 1 month old. So we're excited about that. God brought her into our lives with perfect timing. The kind of timing that only God can do, you know. And so that's a blessing. If you turn in your Bibles with me to Matthew chapter number 14, we'll have the lesson, and it will be short, and you'll be thankful for that. Because I'm joking, of course. And I just want to show you some things from the passage here, and I'd love to preach. I've enjoyed spending the time and just getting to know everybody here and shaking your hand. Please come meet me if I don't meet you before you slip out. I'd love to, and so I want to know everybody here. And just thank you so much for your kindness, allowing us to come here. And let me compliment again, you guys have a great pastor. And just talking to him before the service, and him just allowing us to come to just be with you guys and present our burden. That's not something you find in every pastor in the churches. And he was telling me how he wants to get the mission flags on the wall from the different missionaries they support. That's something that's rare. A pastor that's involved in missions. I understand we need to reach our area for Christ and we need to reach our country, but few pastors are actually concerned about reaching the world. That's something I can see your pastor has a great concern with. So thank you so much, preacher, again. And you guys have just a beautiful church building here that you get to meet in, and we're excited to be here with you. Matthew chapter number 14. If we started at the beginning of the chapter, we'd find that word had just come to Jesus about John the Baptist being killed. John the Baptist had been beheaded, and his disciples had come and taken away his body and buried it, and word came to Jesus. They came and told him that John the Baptist had been killed, and it said that Jesus grieved. Jesus was sad and mournful, but we find that Jesus was being followed by a multitude. The multitudes came, and Jesus had compassion on the multitudes. Now, follow with me. Christ is our ultimate example.
Okay.
And so Jesus, when he was grieving, when he was sad, when he was burdened in his heart, he still had compassion on others. A lot of times, what do we do when we're sad, we're grieving? We just want to be by ourselves. We want to get by alone and not see anybody. But Jesus, when he was grieving, he helped others. There's an important lesson we can learn from that, but that's not the lesson today. These thousands of people come, and the Bible says it was 5,000 men. And so who knows how many women and children were there, but after all this, they began to be hungry. And this is where we get the story of the feeding of the 5,000. With the loaves and the fishes, and Jesus did a miracle there, and his disciples were with him. His disciples heard the word that came when they said, hey, John has been killed, and the disciples knew that Jesus was grieving. And the disciples knew that Jesus ministered to the thousands of people, and the disciples saw the miracle that Christ did. In verse 22 it says, and straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship, to go before him unto the other side. Well, he sent the multitudes away. So now Jesus says, disciples, I need you guys to get to a ship and go to the other side. Jesus knew he needed to be alone. See, as we minister to people in the world, many times we minister hurting also. We try to help others when we ourselves are hurt. We try to give aid and comfort when we ourselves need comfort. This is where Jesus was in his life. And he sent the multitudes away, and he sent his disciples away, and he went alone to pray. Because even Jesus knew that he couldn't do it on his own. Even Christ, our ultimate example, knew in order for him to minister to others, he needed strength that only comes from God.
Amen.
And that's the true in our life also. Sometimes we get so busy doing different things around the church and helping out people and praying for people. And I'm all for Christians that are busy, but don't forget to take time to realize you need God's strength also. So he sends the disciples away in verse 22 and verse 23, when he sent the multitudes away in the evening, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. Verse 24, but the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, it is a spirit. And they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. And he said, Come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the winds boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? And when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased, and they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, Of a truth, thou art the Son of God. I'd like to bring a couple points out of this passage that we can learn and that we can apply to our lives. And let's start with praying. God, thank you so much, Father, for being so good to us. Father, it's true, you have blessed us in many ways. Father, it's true that you're with us in all of our storms. Lord, we ask as I preach this message, God, that you speak through me. Speak through me and speak to hearts of the people. God, I ask all these things in your name. Amen. First of all, we see the disciples. The disciples left Jesus after seeing the great miracle that God had done. They leave Jesus and they get in a ship and they cross over to the other side, knowing that Jesus said, I'll be on the other side with you. And when I see verse 22, when Jesus was the one who constrained the disciples to go across to the other side, I believe without a shadow of a doubt that it was God's will for them to go through the storm they were going to go through. I believe it was God's will for them to face the trial, to face the storm that they were about to face. The disciples, not knowing God in the boat, but God knew all things, and he was there with them. And so the disciples come to the storm as Jesus is alone. It says, but the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And I tell you, we go through storms also. We go through trials in our life. We go through things that cause us to maybe doubt, or things that cause us to have fear and things like that. But God knows the trials that we go through, and God is with us through the trials that we go through. It didn't take God by surprise to know that the ship was in the midst of the sea. God wasn't going to leave them there alone. He'll be with us in our trials also. Look at verse 25. It says, And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. In the fourth watch of the night, Jesus knew right when to come. He knew right when to come. Verse 26 says, And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, It is a spirit, and they cried out for fear. Now let's back up and think. We all go through storms. We all face things that will cause us to doubt. The disciples, they're the ones who were with Jesus. The disciples were the ones who saw Jesus work miracles, and they're the ones that was with Jesus when he fed the 5,000 and when he was grieving, and the disciples should have known God will be with you through your storms. And if the disciples can be afraid, sure, we'll be afraid sometimes, but God's with them. No, none of us would say, when I go through my storm, I don't face any fear. When I face my storms, I trust God. No, and definitely in my personal life, I would say there are some storms that I have faced when I didn't know what God would do. There were some storms that I faced that I had to put it in God's hand because I wasn't sure what I would do. But the disciples saw him walking on the sea, and they were troubled, saying, It is a spirit. And they cried out for fear. So the disciples are in the storm, and they look out, and they see something walking on the water. And instead of thinking, hey, it's Jesus coming to save us, it's Jesus coming to rescue us, he knows we're here, and he's coming, they look out in the water, and they see something coming, and they think it's a spirit. It didn't even cross their mind it was Jesus. They thought it was a spirit. Sometimes in our life, when we're going through a storm, something will happen. Someone will maybe if we're grieving, they may come to comfort us, or maybe something that pastor says. He may say something in a message, and it's God talking to us, but we don't think it's God. We think it's just someone doing something kind. Or maybe someone brings us some food when we need food, or something along those lines. We don't look into our storm and think that was God appearing and showing up to help us through our storm. We just think, oh, that was a kind gesture, or that was something that was nice of them to think of me. Well, really, that's God showing us himself in your storm. Sometimes we don't recognize it. Just like the disciples, they didn't see Jesus in their storm. But straightway, verse 27, Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. Now here's Peter. Peter's that disciple that's always sticking his foot in his mouth. One person said the only time Peter took his foot out of his mouth was to change feet. And that may be true, I don't know. I see a lot of similarities between myself and Peter. Peter did a lot of great things for God. But Peter had to go through a lot of storms and a lot of testing. And he denied Christ, but then he went on to preach Pentecost and do great things. So yeah, sure, Peter, sometimes we get on Peter for sticking his foot in his mouth, but look at what Peter says here. Peter answered and said in verse 28, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. I don't know why Peter thought that first. I don't know why Peter didn't just say, God, if that's really you, cause the waves to stop. God, if that's really you, show us a sign in the sky. If God said that to us, that's what we would ask for sometimes. We would say, Lord, put it in the sky, write it in the sky. But Peter said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. There are few Christians who will say, God, if that's really you, if you'll be with me in my storm, ask me to step out of my boat. Ask me to step out of my comfort zone. Ask me to take a step into something. Ask me to leave what I know to step out for the unknown. God, if you're really real, God, if you're really out there and you'll speak to me and you'll help me, Lord, ask me to step out of something I know. Peter was a fisherman. Peter had probably faced storms before. Peter had been in boats and he was familiar with boats and he was familiar with water and fishing, and Peter had seen storms, I'm sure, but when God said, it's me, Peter looked out and said, God, if it be thou, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. He said, God, if that's really you, help me to step out. Ask me. I thought Peter was a little crazy. Because in verse 29, and he said, come. Now Peter has to take a step of faith. Because it's okay for somebody to say in their storm, to say, Lord, if that's really you, God, help me to step out by faith. But then all of a sudden God will say, I want you to be a missionary to Africa. And you'll change your mind. Or God will say, I want you to give, so much to the church, or I want you to volunteer your time, or use your vehicle for this. And all of a sudden we say, Lord, if that's really you, let me step out by faith and do something. Get me in the storm, God, where you can use me. Lord, I'm not afraid to face the storm. And then as soon as God calls you to go to the storm, we change our mind. Peter said, Lord, if that's you, bid me come unto thee. Verse 29, he said, come. I love the next words here. It says, and when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. Yeah, we get on Peter, don't we? Because Peter was always sticking his foot in his mouth. We get on Peter, yeah, sure, we'll get on Peter because he was always doing something to maybe one thing or another. But Peter was the only disciple to walk on the water. And as Peter called out, he saw God out there, and he said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee. And God said, come. And Peter said, he was coming on the boat. Peter maybe tested the water a little bit before he took the step, I don't know. Or I think he just believed that it was God, and he knew that when he took a step, it'd be hard. Here's Peter, he takes a step out, and he starts walking by faith. Here's where we get on Peter all the time. Verse 30 says, but when he saw the winds boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. Here's the whole message. Peter steps out by faith, just like we should. He stepped into a storm. It's not like he just stepped out into a calm water. He stepped out in the storm. Sometimes we can have enough faith to start something, but will we have enough faith to finish? I hope one day when I'm in heaven and I'm standing before God and I have to give an account for what I did in my life, I hope I can say, Lord, I didn't just step out by faith, but I trusted you through the storm. I trusted you through the trial. God, I didn't just trust you when I was in the boat. I didn't just trust you when I was around my friends. I didn't just trust you when I was around something I was familiar with. Lord, I trusted you when I stepped out into the storm. Peter steps out by faith. And what happens? He looks around. He got his eyes off Jesus. He looks around and he sinks. Here's my favorite part. When he saw the winds boisterous, he was afraid and beginning to sink. Let's watch the next word. He said, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. His friends were in the boat. He could have said, John, save me. James, save me. He could have said, Peter, well, Peter's in the water, but he could have said, Andrew or Thomas, save me. He could have cried to them. Peter was a fisherman. He probably could swim. Peter could have swam back to the boat. Peter could have been in the storm, and he'd probably faced storms before. He had probably fallen out of a boat before. He could have just swam back, but no, even in the storm, he still cried out to Christ and said, Lord, save me. Our church, I I was fortunate enough to work in an addictions program. Our church, we're helping people overcome their addictions. And man, that's something that you need God's strength for. You know, addictions are crippling, and it's a big storm. It's a big thing you have to face. And you know what we found? A lot of times people would get sober, or they'd get off drugs, or whatever their addiction was. They'd stay clean for a little bit. And then something would happen. Some storm, some trial would come. And what's the first thing they did? They would run right back to their storm. They would go right back. They would go right back to what they were doing before. They would go right back to drinking. They would go right back to doing drugs. Whatever their addiction was, they swam back to the boat. They didn't trust God. They trusted God enough to try to quit, to take that first step, to step out of the boat into the storm, to leave the known for the unknown, to step out and follow God. But in the middle of the storm, they didn't have enough faith to stick it out. They just swam back to what they knew. They just went back to their old friends, went back to their drinking buddies, all that kind of stuff. They just went back to the boat. They never had enough faith to stick it out and say, God, I started with you. I'm going to finish with you. I'm going to trust you through the whole way. We get on Peter because he sank. But let's be honest, how many times do we step out by faith? How many times have I stepped out by faith on something and I lost my faith and I sank? There have been a lot of times when I've stepped out on faith to do something I believe God wanted me to do, and in the middle of it I've lost my faith. I saw the storm and I sank. It's something that we all do. But Peter cried out to Christ. Peter did the right thing. He cried out and he said, Lord, save me. And immediately, verse 31 says, Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? God wasn't up there trying to teach Peter a lesson. No, it says immediately he stretched forth his hand and caught him. And you know, we think of Peter walking on the water once, but we don't ever think about how he got back to the boat. See, Peter walked on the water again to go right back to the boat. Now, I want you to imagine, here's the disciples in the boat. Peter stands up and they see Jesus and they think he's a spirit. Jesus says, no, I'm the Lord. And Peter says, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee. And the disciples are thinking, Peter's crazy. Peter, you can't do that. You can't step out. That's water. But Peter steps out and he walks out, and we're sitting in the boat watching Peter walk, and then the storm, the waves get big, and Peter sinks, and we see him sink, and we hear him cry out to the Lord, and the Lord saves him. And now here comes Jesus and Peter walking back to the boat. You know, if I was in that boat, I'd start feeling a little down on myself for not stepping out of faith like Peter. Why didn't, when Peter said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee, why didn't John jump up and say, yeah, Lord, me too? But allow me to come also. You know, the truth is, Andrew could have jumped up, or Thomas could have jumped up and said, you know, God, if Peter has enough faith, Lord, let me step out by faith also. But the truth is, sometimes when we step out by faith, we may be standing alone in the storm. Sure, we have a good church to go to now, but with my wife and I, when we go to Africa, we're going to be working on by ourselves, really. We'll be the only Christians there, working in wherever God puts us in the country. At the beginning, it'll be in northern Uganda, and then up in South Sudan. There's not a bunch of other people coming with us. And that's fine, because God has given us the strength to stand our storm. Just as God has given each and every person in the room the strength to stand whatever storm He'll send you. See, I can't pick your storms. I wish I could say, God, make their storms light. Take away their burdens. But I can't choose your storms. And you can't choose mine. God's the one who chooses our storm. God's the one who picks what we go through. God's the one who decides how much of a burden He puts on us. But I know He'll always be there. And I know, maybe like Peter, I'll step out by faith. Like many of us will. At one point in our life, we all stepped out by faith to trust God as our Savior. And we'll step out by faith on one thing or another, and no doubt we'll lose our faith and we'll sink. But will we have enough faith to, instead of just going back to what we've known, calling on Christ and sticking with Him? Peter did. When Paul got to the end of his life, he said, I fought a good fight. I finished my course. I've kept the faith. I sure wish I had that testimony. Man, when I die and when I face Christ, I'd love to say, man, I fought a good fight. I finished my course. I've kept the faith. I didn't give up. I bought the truth and I sold it not. I didn't quit. didn't just give up, Lord. I stuck it out. The disciples couldn't say that. The disciples just stayed in the boat. And I mean, God used the disciples greatly, but just for the sake of the story, Peter was the only one who stepped out by faith. The disciples stayed. See, the disciples let their fear take hold on their faith. Peter let his faith overcome his fear. Peter succeeded. The disciples just stayed in the boat. Many people don't want to face storms. There's one place in Africa that never has a storm, and that's the Sahara Desert. If you want to live in a place with just sunshine, there'll be no life. There'll be no growth. No one likes storms. No one likes trials. But I'll tell you what, through that storm, it brings rain and life. And through the storms that we face in our life, God will bring growth and life. But they don't come from sunshine. You don't get growth and life just from sunshine and never having rain. No, you got to go through some trials. You got to face some storms in order for God to use those storms to make us grow. I'll finish up with this. My brother owns a tree service. And there was a mighty oak tree in the back of these people's yard, and they wanted to chop down. And he showed me they were going to use it for things, and it was a big oak tree, and it was kind of down on the bottom of a hill. And we chopped it down, and he showed me every year that a tree lives, it gains a ring. And so there are rings around, and you can count them to see how many years the tree's been there. That tree had really big rings. And he showed me, he said, this tree is no good because the rings are too fat. The tree is no good because the years have been too easy on it. It didn't have to worry about the wind because it was guarded from the wind. It didn't have to worry about the water because where we lived in Muskegon, it was right on the swamp. And so it never had to worry about water or wind. And it was a weak tree. And he said there's a lot of them. There's a lot of weak trees that grow kind of in that low boggy area because it seems like they're mighty and strong and they look mighty and strong, but when they chop them down and you see the trees of no use because it had it too easy. I think that's kind of interesting. Sometimes in our life, we just have it too easy. And we face, God sends us all through trials. I'm not saying that people have it too easy, but in America in general, we have it so easy. We have cars and we have the houses and we don't get persecuted for our faith. You go to Africa where they don't have those things. They don't have cars. They don't have houses and nice vehicles and things like that. They're persecuted for their faith. They face storms. But you know what? The strength from trees comes through the storms. The smaller those rings are, the tighter the wood is bound together. The smaller those rings are, the more strong the tree is, the more able it is to face a storm. A lot of times we'll see Christians today who may look like big, mighty Christians, because if you looked at them, you'd say, man, they're a big Christian, they're strong, they're mighty. But when you actually get down to the core of it, we find they're weak because they never faced trials. They never let the trials that they face build them to be stronger. They've never stepped out by faith and done anything for God. They've never stepped out by faith and like Peter and like me and like many of us in here, and they stepped out by faith and they sank, but they got back up and they kept going. You know what? That's a trial that you'll face. That ring is going to be a small ring. It'll be hard. It'll bind you together. It'll make you stronger for God. I don't want to be someone who looks strong but is truly just a weak Christian. I want to be a strong Christian that God can use because I believe that God has a will and a desire for everyone in here. God has a plan for your life. You're not just on earth existing, but you're here for a purpose, to see others led to the Lord and to be an example and to be a prayer warrior for other people. And some people, when we get to heaven, that's the only time we'll ever see how much they've done for Christ. I believe that there'll be a lot of people out there who have just prayed and they prayed and prayed for others, and by making their ministry prayer, they've received so many more rewards than I ever will. But who'll step out by faith? Will you take your storm like the disciples? Will you let your fear take victory over your faith? Will you take your storm like a Peter who steps out and sinks and makes mistakes, but he gets up and he does the right thing again? I'd like to take my storm like Paul, who was able to say at the end of his life that he fought a good fight, finished his course, and kept the faith. I'd sure like to take my storm like that. How will you take your storm this evening? Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for being so good to us. Father, I pray that you'll help the truth that we've learned today, Lord, to just be burned in our heart. God, help us to live for you in every way. And with heads bowed and eyes closed, with the same preacher, you guys can come up and end the service however you want to end it. But,
Go ahead and do questions and answers if you don't mind.
all right. Okay, you saw our video, and I want you all to stop by and get one of our prayer cards. Does anyone have any questions that we can answer? I'll try my best to answer it with our hand. Anyone at all? Yes, sir.
Support, where are you at now with that?
We're at about, we've been on a full-time deputation for 8 weeks.
Okay.
And we're at 15%.
All
so
right.
God's been good. God's been good. Amen. We're excited. That's my favorite question because, it's exciting for us to see how God is providing each of our needs and different things like that. God has honestly been with us every step of the way. So, amen. Any other questions at all? Questions about the country or anything? You can ask any question at all. Yes, my baby does look like my wife. This year she is beautiful. And I didn't think that babies were beautiful before I had a daughter. But they are.
What do people do to survive there for income?
So there's not a lot of industry. Like I said before, the boys go to school and the girls stay home to work. The girls raise the babies and things like that. The boys go to school and there's a small chance that an educated man may be able to make it into a government job or office. That's a possibility, but everybody has gardens. Everybody has a piece of land that they harvest. And the markets, you bring your stuff and it's open markets. So you may raise cattle or be a farmer. That's generally most of the use. The next biggest thing would be government jobs. If you're in, as a police officer or something like that, all those kind of offices are government-held jobs. And that's the goal when a boy goes to school. He goes to school for that reason because he wants to have some sort of a support like that. So. It's sad that the girls don't get to go to school. That's not by choice. That's just by what they decide. Anything else? Yes, sir.
What was, is it South Sudan?
Yes, sir.
And what was it called before that? Was it all just Sudan?
It was all just Sudan. It was maybe not the biggest, but one of the biggest countries in Africa, united before they split. And so there was a little, I think right about 9 billion people. And right now there's no missionaries in the country. No missionaries in the country. The national pastors that were there have now left just because of the fighting and conflict and war. And so they're trying to get stable and get on their feet. So it's important for us to get over there. Pray for us. We're taking our first trip together in January. And so my wife has never, of course, we're not going to take our baby. She'll stay here, so that's going to be hard already. And my wife has never been there. I've been there twice. As long as I've been to 5 countries in Africa. I've done mission work over there. So, yes. What was the question? Okay, they were Sudan together. Yes, sir.
So now, is North Sudan still Muslim?
They are very Muslim.
Is that Boko Haram? Is that the Muslim faction that's there, or is it?
That's one thing I'm not sure. I believe there's 2 Muslim groups.
Okay. I know it's insignificant.
I couldn't name them. When they broke off of North Sudan, they broke off because they wanted Christian freedom. If you're not a Muslim over there, they consider you a Christian. Catholics are considered Christian, all that stuff. It's people who aren't even saved, who know nothing about God, who don't go to church. They're considered Christians simply because of the fact they didn't want to be Muslim.
Yeah.
And the Muslims were so oppressive that they gave their freedom. They just want to be free. They were done with Muslim oppression. In fact, when Obama was the president at that time, they didn't even like Obama because they knew that he was a Muslim. And so even that They didn't want to speak Arabic because they hated the language. If you spoke Arabic in some places over there, it's very dangerous just to speak the language because they don't like anything. They fought with the Muslims for 200 years. And so now they're ready to be done with anything Muslim related.
How do you think that they knew they wanted to be Christians, but there's no Christians? I mean, what was the motive? I mean, that's just interesting.
Well, everybody knows, I say everybody, but that's not true. Many people who started the country were Christians. Dr. John Gehring, for an example, he was a saved man who went to, he was schooled here in the United States. He went to a school in Iowa.
Okay.
And so he was a saved man, a good Christian. He always wore a cowboy hat. He's on our money back there. His cowboy hat was given to him by George W. Bush. And he was very much he loved Bush and had met him several times. And Bush was very significant in helping Sudan gain their independence and helped them a lot. And so they were Christians who started the country. And so that's how they got the name a Christian nation. And they made ties with Israel. And they sent soldiers to Israel to train. And so that's kind of how they were in coalition with them for a short time. So people may not know who Christ was, but they consider themselves Christians. So you see how it's very confusing. You know, they just need the truth, and they're wide open to it. You tell somebody about the gospel, and you know that the Bible says that it alone can stand on its own. You know, if we pass out Bibles, they read the Bible, and God will show Himself through the Bible. And so it's a wide open door, wide open. Yes, ma'am.
So they seem to be more hungry for that than even people in the United States.
They are, very much. Very much. They may be open because of the persecution they faced. It's made them they want the truth. There are people that have been lied to so long that they want something that's actually true. They believe in, some of them worship just gods and things like that. But they just want to know something that's true. And it's sad to see how prosperous the Catholic Church is, because the Catholic Church jumped all over the opportunity and they started spreading lies, and they're making, so much money off of a lie. And the people think it's true, but it's not true. It's just a lie. You baptize and a certificate gets you to heaven. That's not true at all. Christ paid the way. When you tell them that, I mean, it's like a light just clicks on in their eyes. And so, that's a big opportunity. Yes, ma'am. They're wide open to the gospel. Wide open. Anyone else?
So that would be one of the battles that you would be up against, is the Catholic, fighting the Catholic battle.
Oh, yeah.
Or try to establish
Absolutely.
that.
Well, one of the churches that were there was actually burnt down by the Catholic Church. They had started their own. It was an indigenous church. The missionary had left to start another church, and the Catholics came and burnt the church. And so they're very, they're very aggressive over there. And so,
Oh yeah, you're picking your pocket now.
What's that?
You're picking your pocket now.
Yeah.
You ain't gonna like that.
No, exactly. And there's other groups over there. There's the Jehovah's Witness over there, and of course Jehovah's Witness don't believe that there's a heaven or hell. They don't believe that there's anything like that. And it's only for 144,000. So really, they're so confused on things that they don't give people the truth. And so you just need someone to go with the truth. And like I said, in the refugee camps, they're seeing hundreds of people saved because they're so hungry for the truth, hungry for the gospel. They just want to hear it. You just have to tell them.
You're also going to pray for laborers as far as training the nationals to become the,
Absolutely.
that's,
Absolutely. That's one thing. You're right, Richard. We can't stay there forever.
no,
I don't plan on coming home. I haven't planned on going and set a date to come home.
Sure.
We're going to stay there until God's done with us, or until He moves us. But the truth is, I don't have as much influence as a national pastor would have. Somebody has to train them, though. I'm not saying that we should just trust that they're going to learn it on their own and send them money. We go there and train them. But honestly, long after my ministry and our ministry will be done, if we have to come home for health reasons or for any other reason, we have to train nationals and train them how to train others. And so, absolutely, you're right, preacher. They have a lot more influence than we could have as an American. But we also have a lot of advantages that they don't also.
There you go.
So it's important. Pray for laborers, absolutely. God always works it out.
Yeah, amen.
He does. Any other questions? Amen. We've enjoyed being with you guys. Thank you so much. Kind-hearted people. You know, I love, one thing that is neat about Deputation is you get to meet the different people who are Christians, different churches in little areas or big cities, and everywhere you go, you just run into kind people. And your church is, you know, the exceptional kind people. And so you're a blessing in my life, and I thank you so much.
Amen.